Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Right Here, Right Now, live Buffalo football talk presented by Forefathers Organics. I'm your host, Alex Brasky, here for the Batavia Daily and Livingston County News. Each week, we'll discuss Buffalo's favorite football team, along with all the comings and goings from Orchard Park, or in this case, Indianapolis, for the NFL Scouting Combine. Set to kick off with Sean McDermott speaking on Monday afternoon, followed by Brandon Beane, set to address the media on Tuesday. As always, this episode brought to you by our friends at Forefathers Organics in Dansville.
Unlock the power of nature with Forefathers Organics, your premium CBD store. We offer the highest quality CBD and hemp products to liberate your mind, body, and soul, helping you live happy and free. Our mission is driven by excellence and transparency, using cutting-edge scientific methods to combat stress and target issues at their source. From potent ingestible CBD to soothing topicals, all our products are USDA certified organic. Discover all natural wellness from farm to table. Visit forefathersorganics.com for more information.
All right, I've made the drive to Indy once again. Seems like I've passed through Indianapolis more than I would care to this season, just due to the length of the trips, and sometimes they can get a bit grueling. But I'm not going to lie, Indianapolis, a solid spot to visit each and every year, and also stop as kind of a midpoint coming to and from Kansas City, as I did a few weeks ago. It's always interesting to read the billboards as I come to and from the Midwest. I leave the Midwest always thinking I'm going to hell. It's a great but frightening place. People are great, very, very friendly. And Indianapolis, an underrated food spot as well. I've had great oysters here, great steak, Chinese food, and of course the shrimp cocktail at St. Elmo, which I expect to indulge in the coming days, as the NFL Combine, like I said, is set to truly kick off about Wednesday, Thursday. But we'll get started here in Bills country with Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane addressing the media at the beginning of the week. But after all that, I digress. Before diving into the Combine and upcoming NFL draft, we'd like to dive deep into the Bills offseason, and who better to do that with than the mysterious Bruce exclusive himself. Bruce, how you doing? I know that you promised a fingernail reveal at the end of tonight's show, so I'm sure the people are excited for that.
Mr. Brasky, my old friend, I've come to guest with you again. Why are you lying to these people here? No, I'm just kidding.
I thought we were getting the full musical Bruce experience.
No. I'm not going to derail your show. I just want to start on a good note and just make sure everyone knows that it was your fault if they're tuning in for a fingernail reveal and don't get it, and not mine. After all, I do have a brand to uphold that's very important to me. There you go. I never specified whose fingernail it would be. So thankfully, Brasky coming in once again to save me. Dude, thanks so much for having me.
You got it. Excited to break some things down. I'm still digesting a 16-inch pizza that I enjoyed from Goodfellas Pizza here in Indianapolis last night. What makes a good pizza for you? I know you're a big food guy. Are you really focused on the toppings? Are you a cheese guy, the dough, the sauce? Or does it have to be a collection of everything? What makes a good pizza for Bruce Nolan?
For me personally, it's about balance. So I am a big fan of not having my food be homogeneously tasting. Yeah. So for example, if I take a bite of a pizza and the only thing I get is the power of the sauce, right? Then that's not a good pizza. Even if the sauce is great, I didn't sign up to have pizza sauce pudding. Like, I want the entire thing. So homogeny is not something that I'm interested in my food unless I signed up for that. I mean, there are specific things where, I want my orange juice to be homogeneous, right? I want my chocolate pudding to be homogeneous, but I don't want my pizza to be such. It's one of the reasons why mashed potatoes are bottom tier potatoes for me, because it's just whipped homogeny potatoes. I like fried potatoes, I like baked potatoes. Mashed potatoes are fine, but there's so many better things you can do with the potato because you took it and you made it homogeneous. So for me, that's a pizza rule. is that when I bite into it, I want to be able to distinctly determine the quality of all of the items that make up the pizza. And if I can't do that due to the overpresence of one of those items, that's a bad pizza.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. My first job was a dishwasher at what was then called Pontillo's Pizzeria in Batavia. I worked my way up to manager by the time I left there. And I've also worked for several other pizza outfits in Batavia and beyond. So very well versed in the pizza game. And I couldn't agree with you more. The homogeneity, I don't really know the words here. I'm a word guy, but I'm really not well versed on the homogeneous tenses. But I totally agree with you. And in this case, the Goodfellas pizza, it was called the Goodfella. It had pepperoni, some ground beef, and sliced sausage, and the perfect amount of sauce, perfect amount of cheese, and the dough wasn't overpowering either. So it was all in all a great experience. But I'm sure the people didn't come to this podcast for food talk, although you are very well known for your critiques of food with Nate Geary on the former Food for Thought podcast that peeks its head out every once in a while. But now that we got that out of the way, let's talk some Shop Bills offseason, particularly the 12 pending unrestricted free agents, as we have some comments here already. AJ Sobolski, the former host of this show, co-host, I should say, has since moved on to bigger and better things. We wish AJ very well, as he wishes us well as well here on the podcast. But let's talk about those 12 pending unrestricted free agents. I'd like to get your overall take on the lot, and then we can kind of go one by one and determine whether or not we think the Bills should bring them back. If so, at what cost, or let them walk and whatnot. But what's your overall take on this group? I don't think a lot of big names and really seismic free agents that could change things one way or the other, but there are some big decisions to be made.
Yeah, I think there's a couple that are no-brainer, assuming price and market. I think that when you look at players like Reggie Gilliam and Ty Johnson, you think the way that this team and this organization has spoken of them, the probably lack of significant competitive build when it comes to, hey, we're going to run into a 6, 7, 8 team sort of bidding war for any of those things. I think that those are probably players that the team feels strongly that they can get back. They are veterans. They've been down this road before, probably feel strongly they can get back. I think that the Ty Johnson conversation becomes more interesting given the conversation around James Cook. Mm-hmm. I know that Rasul Douglas and Amari Cooper are probably the two quote unquote big names, right, amongst the group. And I think that the team probably does have appetite at the right number, but Amari Cooper and Rasul Douglas are going to be in a situation where they're not upper tier free agents, but they're middle ground free agents. And we're not talking about a team where you think you know the value, they think they know the value. It's kind of an easy conversation to have. Free agency is really about making sure that what they and their representation think that they are is what you think they are as an organization. Yeah. So if Rasul Douglas says, hey, I'm a starting cornerback for another 4 years in a heavy, good defensive, back class, I think that I'm a, 10, 12, $15 million a year player, then maybe that's a different conversation that happens. If Amari Cooper says, receivers getting 20 million, I know I had a kind of a down year, but I think 15, 18 million for me is probably a good thing, then okay, maybe that's a different conversation. So I think there's more variance in the conversations with Cooper and Douglas than there are with the Reed Fergusons and the Ty Johnsons and the Reggie Gilliams of the world. I think Dwayne Smoot is a player that kind of low key, I kind of really hoping he comes back. Yeah. I think in a year that was disappointing from the defensive line for the Buffalo Bills and coming off of a Super Bowl where now, because everybody's held captive by whatever they watched the last time they watched football, now it's going to be all, hey, everything for the defensive line, everything, as if somehow that's like not been the case since like the beginning of time, that you want to have a strong defensive line. But sure, I'm interested in having Smoot back. So I think that those are players that I think the Bills could end up with re-signing 3, 4 of these players, but I don't think any of them are going to be situations where they're spending meaningful money to retain one of their own, the way that it has been in previous off seasons for the Bills.
Sure, and we've gotten a little bit of clarification on the salary cap. It hasn't been nailed down quite yet. It's going to fall somewhere between $277.5 and $281.5 million for the 2025 season, and the Bills not as poor of a situation as they were last year when it comes to the salary cap. They are about $10 million over the cap if the cap falls at about $280 million, placing them in that hole with the league year set to kick off on March 12th. They did re-sign a few players, Alec Anderson, Ryan Vandermark, the main two. Shane Buechele also signed a 1-year deal, and then several to those reserve future deals. But you look at this salary cap and you look at what Brandon Beane is going to have to do in terms of those salary cap gymnastics, and we will break down these 12 free agents piece by piece. But before we get there, obviously, in order to re-sign those players, there's going to have to be those gymnastics done by Brandon Beane. And the most obvious is, of course, Von Miller and the potential restructuring of his exorbitant contract, which he was a team player. He did entering the 2024 season, said all the right things following the season in terms of his interest in coming back. And I don't see why, if he converted a lot of that money into incentive-based last season, I don't see why he wouldn't do the same this year. His contract set to pay him over $23 million, none of which is guaranteed. Therefore, if the Bills release Miller before June 1st, it would save the team $8.5 million against the salary cap. But like I said, another possible scenario is that pay cut, converting much of his contract to the performance-based incentives, as we saw him do a season ago. How do you see things playing out here with Miller? Would you rather see the outright release? Would you rather have him stick around this next season and take the pay cut? And do you see him doing that once again this season like he did last year?
Very rarely are you willing to say, yeah, I can see that happening when it comes to players taking pay cuts, but Von Miller's already done it once.
Yeah, right.
So in this case, it's a different conversation.
And kind of unprecedentedly so. I don't know if we've ever seen a player do it to that level.
Yeah, it was it took us all kind of by surprise that he just bet on himself and said, hey, you know what, I can get this back. And I don't think he's turned into the player that the Buffalo Bills thought they were getting. I mean, you never know what it would have happened had he not injured his knee at that age. But you think about the Bills' defensive line and the desire to get better. I think one of the big conversations that's going to happen this offseason is the concept of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So I want better players too. But I don't want to get rid of solid players because they're not great players. So I want great players. Everybody wants great players. Let's get more of those. I love great players. I did an entire podcast where I specifically mentioned the phrase, that dude. I need that dude.
Sure.
I love dudes. Big fan of dudes, right?
Yeah.
But I just need that dude. I don't even need a dude, which is good. I need that dude. We need that level. That's the reason why the Myles Garretts, the Max Crosbys of the world have made their way across Bills Mafia's lips over the last few months, is because they want that dude. But I'm not interested in getting rid of the dude, and I'm not really interested in getting rid of a dude just because they're not that dude. So for me, I'm fine if you want to outright cut Von Miller, right? But I would be very interested to know who that guy is that you're bringing back to replace him, because if you don't have Dwayne Smoot, you don't have Von Miller, you're just getting new for news sake, which I know that's the temptation, right? The temptation is, I just want something different. Like, I don't even care if it's better. I just assume it's going to be better because it's new, right? We're full Barney Stinson, right? New is always better. But right. For me, I just don't want to lose out on solid players or reasonable players because they're not amazing players. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's my big conversation, which is why I'm leaning more toward, hey, if he's willing to accept the pay cut, by all means, let's bring him back and let's have him in that role. And then let's add something on top of him. You know, let's add a first-round pick. Let's add a Myles Garrett. Let's add a Max Crosby. Let's do something to add to it instead of just try to replace it with something better.
Yeah, and he made an impact this year. I think he was probably the Bills' second most impactful pass rusher, albeit in a limited role, playing a small percentage of the snaps. Behind Greg Rousseau, I think he made the biggest impact and a big jump from what he produced a season before. So by no means do I think Von Miller is done, and I think if he's willing to accept that pay cut or restructure of the contract, whatever it may be, I think you need to hang on to him, especially the salary cap situation that you're in. If you're going to go out and get a Myles Garrett, a big ticket item like that, like you said, you need players to supplement that guy, and Von Miller certainly could be that. And if you go out and get a Myles Garrett, you might be getting rid of Greg Rousseau. So you're certainly going to need to retain some firepower to add alongside a potential game changer, game record, such as Garrett, a Max Crosby, a Micah Parsons, who I think Greg Thompson was kind of putting his toe in the water in terms of the possibility of that trade down the pike. But we'll see what happens there with Miller. The other option for the Bills in terms of getting in good salary cap standing, another obvious one is Josh Allen's contract. He's been playing well below market value for the past few seasons. In 2025, he's set to make $14.5 million. For comparison, Dallas Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott recently signed a deal that will pay him nearly $60 million per season. So I think there's going to have to be some decisions made there with Allen's contract, and there's also ways to go about it that you can make it work for the team, make it work for the player, and maybe push some of that money down the road in order to take advantage of what is a tough salary cap situation. Have you thought about what the Bills might do in terms of Josh Allen's contract? What do you think the future holds for him in terms of a potential extension, a restructuring, anything of that nature?
I think you're going to see something with the contract this offseason. Now, it might be a restructure because he does have one of those contracts where you pretty much revisit it for restructuring for just, dipping into the piggy bank to get as much money as you need every offseason. And that's a lot of those major quarterback contracts are built that way. It's restructure, extend, restructure, extend. Like that's the way it kind of works. And so I'd be surprised if there wasn't an extension or at least a restructure this offseason. I think a restructure is probably a little bit more likely than an extension at this point. When you look at the quarterbacks that are coming up around for extension again, you think to yourself, okay, are we going to miss out on that much by waiting another year? It's not like you've got 5 or 6 other quarterbacks who are all of a sudden the 60 million tag becomes 70 million if you wait one more year. I don't think that's probably the case, but I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being an extension that makes Josh Allen, $60 million and $1 on his average annual value, because nobody in the world's going to sit back and think that Josh Allen doesn't deserve more than Dak Prescott, especially coming off of the MVP season. So I do think you're going to see it because you pretty much always see it now, right? You always see it with these top quarterback contracts in the offseason that they go to the piggy bank to either restructure them or extend them.
And reading The Athletic, and specifically Joe Buscaglia, who does a great job breaking down the Bills offseason each and every year. I don't claim to be a salary cap guru or a numbers guru at that. When I look at numbers for too long, it tends to make my head spin. But per Joe, he believes the most probable course of action in Josh Allen's circumstance would be to convert all but the veteran minimum of Allen's 2025 $14 million base salary into a prorated signing bonus, adding a void year for 2029, since only 4 years remain on Allen's current deal. In this case, Buffalo could prorate a signing bonus up to 5 years. By taking those measures, the Bills could save $10.2 million on this year's salary cap, which only adds an extra $2.6 million per year onto his cap charges through the remainder of his deal. And also per Buscaglia, while a contract extension would yield savings for 2025, quarterback deals take an extended amount of time to put together and are overwhelmingly complicated as opposed to any other position. And due to a quick track to March 12th, which is the start of the new league year, it would behoove the Bills to simply restructure Allen's deal and begin the negotiations to have the extension help 2026 the most, when Allen would have a $66 million cap hit after restructuring his 2025 base salary. So a lot to take in there, but if you'd like to read more, you can visit The Athletic. it's well worth a subscription. Joe does a great job. We're hoping to have him join us next week to have him help us break down the Bills offseason and prepare for the draft as well. So a big thanks to Joe for his help on that. And the last item in terms of contract talk, salary cap talk I want to discuss here is Ed Oliver's deal, which is set to cost Buffalo over $20 million against the cap in 2025 and beyond. In a perfect world, if the Bills are able to get Miller, Allen, and Oliver restructured, it could create about $15 million in cap relief. And I think if you're Ed Oliver, you have to be willing to do that. You sign that big contract, but this year I think it was really proven that he can't really impact the game on his own to the level he did last season, a career year. I think you need a running mate for Ed Oliver. Daquan Jones is no longer that player. I said midway through the year, I think he's a spent player. I don't think I've changed my opinion as the season wore on. I think Ed Oliver has to take a pay cut or restructure in some way to help provide some salary cap relief, and I think that could be another option for the Bills, among other things with Deion Dawkins, Dawson Knox, perhaps some other players as well.
I think a simple restructure for Ed Oliver is probably going to be what happens. I think they're going to convert some of that salary to a signing bonus to punt it down the road a little bit. I think that when you think about the Buffalo Bills' top 10 highest paid players as far as cap, and you think, okay, now every single time I do a simple restructure on one of these players, I am decreasing the probability of a future release. Yeah. That's essentially what's happening, right? So you look at it and you have to be very selective. That's the reason why you do it with Josh Allen every single offseason, because the Bills aren't going to cut Josh Allen, right? That's the way it works. Now, we've seen in some cases where organizations make the wrong decision on who to restructure. Of course, the Browns famously signed Deshaun Watson to a 5-year, $250 million fully guaranteed contract, and then decided to double, triple, and quadruple down on Deshaun Watson every single offseason by restructuring the deal. And now, you cut him, it's $200 million against your cap. Like, that's what happens when you do these simple restructures. So I think you have to pick players that you think you're going to keep around at those elevated numbers down the line. And I think that the Bills like Ed Oliver. I think that they like the production that they've gotten from him when he's had a player next to him that they could count on it. I think the interesting conversation revolves around Daquan Jones. And I think the interesting thing is that we say things like, well, maybe he didn't come back from injury, but he actually came back at the end of last year. So the end of 2023, he came back from pectoral injury and played really high level.
Yeah.
And so it's really strange because it's not the injury, because he was playing at a really high level at the end of 2023. And then 2024 came and it just wasn't quite there. He just didn't have that year. And so you think to yourself, I mean, goodness gracious, if he was going to play poorly, you'd think he would have played poorly at the end of 2023 when he was coming back from a pec injury, but that's not what happened. It has been a very underreported but strange story of the Buffalo Bills in 2024 was the decline of Daquan Jones. And so if you feel comfortable that if you get a better one tech next to him, you're going to get the same Ed Oliver, then it makes sense from a simple restructure standpoint to be able to generate some cap relief and know you're going to get a bounce back year from Oliver.
Yeah, speaking of Jones, the time comes for all of us, Bruce, and I was talking about pizza at the beginning of this episode. There was a time I could eat an entire medium pizza, wake up the next day, and pound another one by noon. Like I said, I still think I'm feeling the digestion process go here. So for me, the time has come in terms of my ability to indulge in my favorite foods. I've got to scale it back a little bit. Perhaps the time has come for Daquan Jones as well. And I lied. One more item I want to talk to you about before we get to some individual players on the other side of a break. Matt Milano, what are the Bills going to do with him? It would save the team $9.6 million as a post-June 1st release. Like Miller, if Milano doesn't take a pay cut, he could be on his way out the door. He played well in his return from injury this past season, but like I said, I think he needs to take that pay cut to remain in Buffalo. And to be quite honest with you, I think he will. I think he's a team guy. I think he likes his fit here in Buffalo, and he doesn't seem like a guy who would go out and chase the money.
I would be surprised. I would. Not because he's not that kind of guy that you said, but I'd be surprised if they looked at him as a high priority pay cut player because of the way that the team feels about him. And you've seen the asks that go around this time of year, right? Right around this time of year, right around Combine, is when you start to have those conversations and you start to say, hey, do you think, maybe your client would be interested in doing that? And then what happens is the agent goes to the combine and just happens to have a conversation, bumps up against another GM and said, hey, I know, super hypothetical, right? Because clearly we're not tampering here, but
the legal tampering period before the legal tampering
exactly.
period.
Just hypothetically, if my client became available, like what would a player who looked exactly like Matt Milano, but not actually Matt Milano, just someone who looks like Matt Milano, right? What do you think he would get on the open market? What do you think that would be? And then
Similar
they start feeling it out.
The Rams are doing with Matthew Stafford.
Exactly. The Rams are doing it the smart way. They're like, listen, we're going to keep everything above board. Go talk to other people. And by all means, it's almost like that. You ever see the GMs at the end of the year and they do their press conferences and they have the code word? They always say he's earned the right to test free agency. Right? That's code for we very much disagree with the sense of value that we're currently having with this agent, and we're going to let the market decide because we think they're insane, right? It's like that, only much nicer with the Rams and Matthew Stafford. So for me, I would be surprised, to be honest, if it was a Matt Milano thing. I think that this team feels a certain way about him. I think he'd be low on the priority list when it came to pay cut conversations, but I've seen crazier stuff. So for me, my eyebrows would raise. I would be surprised if they had meaningful conversations about either releasing him or cutting the salary. But been wrong before, so it would be interesting and make my eyes raise up a little bit.
All right, we'll finally get to a few players here on the other side of a break. Thanks to our friends at Forefathers Organics. At Forefathers Organics, their mission is to liberate, educate, and innovate with the highest quality CBD and hemp-derived products for your mind, body, and soul so you can live happy and free. Visit them at 87 Franklin Street in Dansville, online at forefathersorganics.com, or call them at 585-335-2223 to learn more about the products they offer. All right, Bruce, if you could refresh me on the players you mentioned off the top. You went decently in depth on those guys. I think you might just gloss over them and maybe dive in a little bit deeper to others. Tom thinks the Bills should definitely re-sign Cooper and Douglas. What were the players that you led off the broadcast with?
So I broke them into two tiers. The first was I think there's probably a good chance they resign because I think that they're on the lower end of the conversations that would happen on the market. I had Mac Hollins, Reggie Gilliam, and Ty Johnson, Reed Ferguson on that list. And then I did say that I would be interested in having a conversation about Dwayne Smoot. And then I brought up Cooper and Douglas. And I said those are more variable conversations because there could be a team on the open market who offers them something that the Bills are not willing to pay. And so of the ones I mentioned, the ones I am least sure were to come back would be Amari Cooper and Rasul Douglas, not because I don't like them as players. I actually really like Amari Cooper. I've always been an Amari Cooper guy for years and years and years. But it's just that they're in the tier of player that someone could overpay for. And I wouldn't expect Buffalo to reach outside their comfort zone for either of those players.
Yeah, I think both players, also aging players. It's all going to depend with those two, what kind of term they're looking for. Cooper, I think you'd like to maybe get him on a one-year deal if you do get him back. Douglas, not sure what exactly he's looking for. Cooper entering his age 31 season, 10 years in the NFL. Average annual value of his previous contract, $20 million. Douglas, as I scroll down here on my list, entering his age 31 season, 8 years in the NFL. Previous contract, $11.9 million average annual value. I think, I think it's a discussion worth having. In my Bills in the most recent issue of Bills Digest coming up, I should say, set to be released on Monday digitally and in your mailboxes a week or so later. I have Rasul Douglas and Amari Cooper, both as players that I would let walk this season. I don't think the price is right there. I don't think the production is what you're going to be looking for come next season. And with the expected transition that the Bills are going to make defensively to maybe some more man coverage, I don't think that suits Rasul Douglas as well. And he's been known as a player to get his hands on on balls and intercept passes defensively. And the Bills were a takeaway machine this year, and Douglas not able to contribute in that regard. So maybe slowing down a bit for him. Cooper dealing with a wrist injury throughout the year, also maybe slowing down a bit as well. I think I'd let both of those players walk. You mentioned Matt Collins. That's certainly a player that I'd bring back, not only for the production on the field, led the team in receiving touchdowns, just the vibes he created in that locker room, really leadership in a unique way. I don't think he was a player that gets in your face and really motivates you that way. Just his hard work, his dedication to his craft, and just being himself, I think really rubbed off on his teammates this season, and that's certainly a player I'd be interested in bringing back as well. You look at Reggie Gilliam and Reed Ferguson, I'd put them in the same bucket. Two players that aren't going to jump off the page and grab headlines, but players who have been around here for a while. Ferguson, the longest tenured Bill, and Gilliam, just an unsung hero for this group on special teams and when he's in there as a fullback. And he's become a little bit more valuable with the team's usage of more heavy sets as well. So two players, of course, that I'd want back if I were the Bills. And Ty Johnson, a player I'd want back, but I think it may be a little bit tougher to get him back. I'd like to hear what you have, your thoughts on that. Not a player who has really garnered a big price tag in his past, but coming off an impactful season in, albeit a reserve role. Maybe there's a team out there willing to pay Ty Johnson. DeJuan Smoot, price has got to be right there. You got to sign him probably to a one-year deal, but the versatility is a selling point for me there. I think there's going to be some changes made up front, and having a versatile player like that who can play both inside and out, I think is mighty valuable. But your thoughts on Ty Johnson? You think there's going to be a team out there willing to pay him a little bit more than the Bills are willing to?
I think one of the things that's going to assist this conversation is the idea that people aren't even willing to pay RB1s in the NFL right now, much less players who people don't know if they're RB1s,
right?
Especially players who are veteran running backs who people don't know are RB1s. So I would be surprised if there was a meaningful market, not because he's not a good player, not because he's not a valuable player, because that's the way the market works.
Yeah.
The conversations about running backs are just now getting to the point where do you pay your RB1? Like, we've got a long way to go before we go to do you pay your RB2 and RB3, right? Like there's a big conversation to be had before it even gets to that spot. Like there are Buffalo Bills fans arguing in mentions right now that I muted a long time ago.
They are?
About whether or not, yeah, I know, really? What? Weird. About whether or not the Buffalo Bills should pay James Cook. So if that's the conversation, I don't think that there are meaningful fans out there who are yelling at their team that you have to throw $5 million a year at Ty Johnson. Like not because he's not a good player, because the conversation hasn't even evolved past do you pay your RB1 to get to do you pay your RB2 or RB3. So that's the reason why I feel confident that the Bills want him back, that he'll probably be back.
And Mexico Marty, one of our loyal listeners here on the show, brings up a good point. I don't think you're going to get Rasul Douglas on a one-year deal. I think the way I heard Amari Cooper talk glowingly about the Bills and specifically Josh Allen and how he's enjoyed playing football here in Buffalo or there in Buffalo. I'm not in Buffalo currently, but I don't think you're going to get Rasul Douglas back on a one-year deal. Perhaps Amari Cooper. Do you see it kind of the same way?
I do. I think that Amari Cooper is more likely to come back than Rasul Douglas, for not just the reason of the aging stuff that you've said, but also because the other point that you brought up, which was, do the Bills want to have a change in the way that they do coverage on the back end? Do they want to add more man principles? Because we saw them do it. And Sean McDermott said something that was really interesting and got my ears perked up. It was one of the first times he made a comment about man versus zone. And he flat out said, listen, I can sit there in zone and get, nickel and dime to death, or I can go man. And that just didn't work out for us. So his solution was, we want to be able to go man. And you watch the Buffalo Bills. It wasn't just Kyrie Irving not playing well. It was the man coverage principles were bad. It looked like they hadn't practiced it. Like it wasn't something where all of a sudden, the Chiefs go into a condensed formation and you see the split between the two corners, like not change at all. And you're like, well, hold on now. you know what's going to happen, right? You both are going to bump into each other and and there they go. They bumped into each other. Like, that's how it works, because there are principles of how you run man coverage against specific things. And when you have condensed formations, you have to be really on top of your communication and on point with your communication. And they just weren't. And so for me, it looks like that's a possibility. I think it's one of the biggest conversations to be had this offseason when you think about the Bills acquiring a cornerback, whether that's free agency or the draft. Is this something where maybe they're going to run a little bit more man? And Christian Benford, he's just a good player. I'm not worried about him. Yeah. So you can play him in man. I'm not worried about him at all. I saw some unbelievable man coverage reps from Christian Benford, and, played a lot of man in college. So for me, you've got one corner who can do it all. You don't have a second corner who can do it all. Is Rasul Douglas a corner who could do it all? I don't think so. That's the reason why I'm leaning toward Amari Cooper being back more likely than Rasul Douglas.
And you see some of the additions in terms of reported coaching additions that the Bills are set to make in the near future. Mike Pellegrino from the New England Patriots among them. I think that also points to probably a shift toward man coverage and just bringing in, I think, coaches to assist a green defensive coordinator in Bobby Babich, a green defensive line coach in Marcus West, both of whom I think were a little over their skis this past season. I think things moving a little bit too quickly for both of them. You saw Babich's defense come out in games and really struggle, and then when he had time to kind of sit back and adjust at halftime, things got a little bit better. So perhaps maybe taking some things off of his plate, adding some veteran coaches to his coaching staff, I think would work wonders for him and this team as well. And you're right, I think it's going to play a significant role in the personnel in terms of who they sign in free agency. And Bruce, I know I'm keeping you a little bit longer than I asked you for. Just a couple more players to discuss for me. The main one is Damar Hamlin. I know that that's another player that Bills fans are arguing about in your mentions, my mentions, and probably everybody's mentions across the Bills media sphere. 79.2% of the snaps as a starter for the Bills this season. He will be entering his age 27 season. It's going to be interesting to see what he's able to get on the open market if he does go there. Is Damar Hamlin a player that you think would benefit the Bills in bringing back? I think Cole Bishop is the clear starter next year. Will Hamlin, I know this is probably a better question for him, but do you think he'd be willing to accept a backup role after elevating to a starting role this season? And do you think that is a player that the Bills will find themselves having on their roster next season?
One of my general principles, can't see me, I'm doing a salute, is that when it comes to free agency, I have very little desire to re-sign players that are fine, unless it's for money. And what I consider to be money is like, a 1-year deal for $3 or $4 million is pretty much my max, right? So for me, when I look at that kind of thing, somebody's going to pay Damar Hamlin like he's a starter because he was a starter, I think. Yeah. And so what does a starting safety go for, even if they're not a star? I think that's going to be a level of thing that I think to myself, how replaceable at what cost? That's what I think about, because there is people don't want to talk about it, right? They don't want to talk about the economics of football at all. They just want to go good player, yes, bad player, no. Like, that's it. That's the only thing they want to talk about. But smart teams make smart decisions based on opportunity cost. And that's one of the factors. So for me, if I can duplicate the same level that I'm getting from Damar Hamlin from a 4th or a 5th round pick at a 9th of the cost, right? A 7th of the cost from a salary standpoint, then that's what I want to do. So for me, that's the reason why those conversations happen around players like Ty Johnson, Reggie Gillen, because you think, okay, I can re-sign him for 2 years, $4 million. And okay, we're good. Like, we're fine there. I feel good about it. Like, I'm okay with that. I'm okay not trying to replace them with a day 3 pick. But when you start to get into the $5, $6, $7, $8 million range, you're like, okay, if I can replace this with a day 2 or a day 3 draft pick at markedly less cost, that's what I want to do. And that's where Damar Hamlin falls for me. If you said, hey, you can re-sign him 2 years, $4 million, I'd be like, okay, cool. Because then if I start him, great. I'm awesome. If I don't start him, I have no heartburn at that point for having a backup who makes that kind of money. But I don't think that's what the market's going to say. I think the market's going to pay him like a starter. And I think that when you drafted Cole Bishop and you knew that he was a project, you knew he had stuff to work on, you did it knowing full well that you were hoping for a better ceiling than you previously had. And so for me, I could be wrong. You could end up seeing a re-signing for that amount of money, but for what I think he's going to get in the market, I would not be interested.
Yeah, in my upcoming issue of Bills Digest, he is a player that I have marked as re-signed, but I also mentioned that I wouldn't move heaven and earth to bring him back.
Right.
I'm just not sure what he's going to get on the open market. If you're able to get him at a team-friendly contract and something that works for both sides, he's obviously become more than just a player here in Buffalo with his story and everything he's meant to the community, his charity work, and really across the nation. So it would be great to see him on the Bills roster come training camp. But like you said, I think it's got to be something that works for both sides. And finally, the last group that I'll ask you about before I let you get out of here, Bruce, and once again, thank you for spending the time with me. The defensive tackle position, 3 players to decide on, 2 of which were retreads that they brought back midway through the year, Quentin Jefferson, Jordan Phillips. I think Phillips, sorry, brother Bill, didn't really produce much of anything. Jefferson, a little bit more, but not much. Austin Johnson, entering his age 31 season, is a player that maybe I'd have a little bit more interest in re-signing, but I think I'd let all 3 of these players walk.
None of that really moves the needle for me. I think one of the biggest misses, and I've had my share of misses for sure. I think one of the biggest ones I had in the last year was I came into this year really excited about the defensive tackle group.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think that you were going to see a drop off from Daquan Jones the way you did because he came back and played well after the pec injury. And I felt good about the Austin Johnson. I was nice to have players back who knew the system. I thought, hey, this might be the best group of interior defensive linemen that Sean McDermott has had. And that's just not what ended up happening. Yeah. So for me, not only would I love the phrase you used, wouldn't move heaven and earth, right? Not only would I not move heaven and earth, like, I wouldn't move a bookshelf at that point, right? Because this is a great interior defensive line class. Yeah. So I'm not going to put massive effort into making sure you don't lose any of these people when you might just be clogging up a roster for a younger guy who you want to give an opportunity to. I think one of the other things was I don't think Dwayne Carter played nearly as well as I thought he was going to. No. I was a big Dwayne Carter fan coming out of the draft. And so my interior defensive line takes for 2024, not great, Bob. Right? Like, it's just not good at all. I did not do well. And so here we are suffering for that. And I think that when you look at the defensive line class that you have this upcoming year in the NFL draft, you look at some of the free agent veterans, you're like, okay, I think some turnover is probably necessary there.
Not the only one who's been wrong. I went on Anthony Prohaska and Eric Turner's podcast before the start of the 2023 season, and I was heaping praise on Trent Sherfield and Deontay Hardy, and we all know how that worked out in Buffalo. So, Bruce, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Could you leave us with this, maybe a few names that you're looking for at the combine and the draft? You mentioned the defensive tackle class. Kenneth Walker is a player that really everybody is talking about. And is there anybody else that strikes your fancy in the early stages of draft prep?
Yeah, I think Kenneth Grant, somebody I just wrote.
Kenneth Grant, excuse me.
Yeah, Kenneth Grant, someone.
Who's Kenneth Walker?
Kenneth Walker's the running back for the Seahawks.
There you go.
I do think Kenneth Grant is a player that a lot of people have talked about being their IDL3. I don't think he's a player who makes it to the Buffalo Bills because I think that he's going to absolutely blow up the combine. Like, I think by the next week, you will be like, oh my gosh, he'll be the number 1 name on the people's list because he was number 3 on the college football's Bruce Feldman's freaks list coming into this year. I think he's going to blow up the combine. People are going to be like, he ran like a 4.93 at 340 pounds. Like, that's what they're going to go. They're going to go, holy crap. How high do we have to move up to get Kenneth Grant? Like, that's going to be a conversation in a week. You wait and come back to this. I'll level with you. I really like Derek Harmon. I'm not upset at all if you have to, quote unquote, settle for Derek Harmon. I think there's a reasonable chance that he ends up going ahead of Grant. I don't think people are talking about it now the way he should. So for me, that's a player I'm interested in. How about Omar Norman Lott from Tennessee? That's a player I'm looking at. I know people are going to get mad because he's probably going to weigh in at sub 300 pounds. People are going to get mad and go, hey, we need more size. You already have Oliver. Like that's going to be a conversation. He's just really good. Like, I don't know what to tell you. He's just really good at playing football. And I enjoy watching him. So a lot of my conversations that happen with my wife around the combine, it's going to be a Bills agnostic conversation because I just like watching players, right? Randall in the comments says back-to-back defensive tackles, Mason and Grant. Listen, if you can get high enough for Mason and also get Kenneth Grant, you've given up all of your picks for the next 5 years. Like that's the only way that happens because I think Mason's going maybe in the top 8. So, literally all the picks like that will cost you all the picks. So I think it's a great defensive tackle class. I think there's gonna be a lot of fun players. I do think that Jordan Phillips from Maryland is going to be a conversation because it'll be like, well, you have to have a Jordan Phillips on the team. Like that's going to be the conversation. Well, you just replace one Jordan Phillips with another Jordan Phillips, right? Like that will be a conversation that people will have. And this Jordan Phillips fits one tech more than the other Jordan Phillips did. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's going to be a conversation. I think that those 4 players coming out of the combine, I think Grant, Harmon, Norman Lott, and Jordan Phillips are going to be meaningful conversations for Bills Mafia when it comes to that. I think Tyleek Williams from the Ohio State national champion, the Ohio State Buckeyes, I think that's going to be a conversation people have too.
Yeah, for me, I am team all the picks when it comes to Myles Garrett. The way that Brandon Beane is drafted at the top of the draft in recent drafts with Kyer Elam and others, send those picks to Cleveland, bring in a proven game changer in Myles Garrett. He seems to be hinting at the fact that he wants to come to Buffalo. I think that's what you have to do if you're the Bills general manager. And he's done a great job drafting in the mid to late rounds, so maybe stick there and give away some of your top picks to get a player like Garrett. But Bruce, why don't you tell the people what's coming up on the podcast and also what you have planned in terms of future meals that we see on social media that gets my stomach grumbling?
I think tomorrow's chicken enchilada night for us here in the Nolan household. So very excited about that for sure. I think that this upcoming week, when it comes to the podcast, I think it's going to be a statement about reaches because the combine is a conversation where we start putting our minds on what good and bad value looks like. And so I think that I want to have conversations a little bit about he'll be there in the 5th or he won't be there in the 2nd. Like, I think we need to have conversations about that before we get too deep into draft prep, because that's something that's always bothered me. And well, I don't have anything else to talk about, so I'm going to talk about that. So we're going to talk about that on the pod next week, and it's going to be a good time. Still working on a couple songs for potentially either a part musical or a full musical later this offseason. We will see. I'm a busy guy.
Miss N involved, or
say that again?
Mrs. N involved in the musical? Okay.
Always. Listen, I don't have any interest, so I already have to spend 90 minutes to 2 hours every Wednesday night here in my studio recording away from Mrs. Nolan. If I'm going to do extra, I'll be daggoned if she's not going to be a part of it, because then I'm just not interested. Right. So we're going to have a good time. We're going to see if we can make it work. There's no promises, right? But even if I can drop a song or two, I think this offseason, I think that'd be fun.
All right, Bruce, once again, I appreciate you joining me for this lengthy podcast. Things kind of got away from me here and was enjoying the conversation. We'll have to get you on again soon, and enjoy the rest of your night, and looking forward to the combine and the draft.
Sounds good, sir. Talk to you soon.
All right. Very gracious, Bruce, as always, with his time, laying things out for the people, giving you his opinions, and really bouncing back and forth some ideas in terms of what the Bills might do with their 12 unrestricted free agents entering the off season. In addition to the 12 unrestricted free agents that the Bills must consider re-signing, the Bills are also set to peruse the free agent market, likely searching for low-cost options to help bolster the 2025 roster. I know that a lot of Bills fans want Myles Garrett, and hey, I'm a part of that group. I think it would benefit the Bills greatly to go out, get a Myles Garrett, and maybe even a Max Crosby to a lesser scale. But really, Garrett, I think, is the player that Brandon Beane and company should have their sights set on. But I think the more likely scenario is the Bills going out, getting those low-cost options at a short-term deal in order to help fill out this roster. But there are a few players that are likely in search of longer-term deals that I think could really fit well with the Bills. And if Brandon Beane is able to clear some of that cap space that we talked about at the top of the podcast, I think a few players that the Bills might have to look at: edge Josh Sweat, edge Khalil Mack, cornerback Charvarius Ward, cornerback DJ Reed, and also someone who's not a free agent, wide receiver Devontae Adams, potentially set to be released by the Jets in the coming weeks and months. Sweat entering his age 28 season. He is projected to earn $9.6 million per season, and that is per overthecap.com. The average annual value of his previous deal was $10 million. Sweat made a significant impact for the Eagles this season, totaling 8 sacks on the year, but he's obviously most remembered for his production in the Super Bowl, 2.5 sacks, a disruptive force against the Chiefs' offensive line and quarterback Patrick Mahomes. And for the Bills, that certainly strikes your fancy. You haven't been able to get to Patrick Mahomes in the past by rushing just 4, and that's exactly what the Eagles were able to do in that game, and Sweat was right at the forefront of that strong effort put forth by Philadelphia in that game. And I think if the Bills are able to get their hands on Josh Sweat come this offseason, I think that would really be a big deal for Brandon Beane and company. And also Khalil Mack, an aging player entering his age 34 season. Not sure how much left in the tank he has, but experience here in Buffalo, the University at Buffalo product. He is just 1 season removed from a 17-sack campaign with the Los Angeles Chargers. Total just 6 sacks this season, playing 20% fewer snaps under new head coach Jim Harbaugh. And that's likely what you would see from Khalil Mack in Buffalo. You're not going to see him playing 80% of the snaps. You're going to see him somewhere around 50, 40, maybe at the highest 60%. But this is an 11-year pro. This is someone who's a consistent sack producer and a game wrecker, who's proven to be a game wrecker. The age is certainly something to consider here. But while it's difficult to project what to expect for Khalil Mack, overthecap.com is projecting his market value at about $11.5 million. So not sure if that falls within the Bills' capabilities in terms of the price or the salary cap, but Khalil Mack is another player that I would certainly keep my eyes on as the Bills look to improve their pass rush this offseason. I think that's got to be the main goal for this team in free agency and the draft, improving that defensive line, specifically on the interior, but also bolstering the edge, where they just haven't gotten that game-changing player. Greg Rousseau, I think, is a solid number 2 pass rusher in a great pass rushing unit, but just hasn't really gotten over the hump to be that game-changing player that I think many expected him to be when the Bills drafted him years ago. In terms of the cornerback position, another position of need for the Bills this offseason with the potential departure of Rasul Douglas. You look at Charvarius Ward, a 7-year pro, entering his age 29 season. This is a player I think you could get at a low cost. Overthecap.com projecting his market value at about $1.5 million. Ward played 12 games for the 49ers last season, failed to record an interception. It wasn't his best season, but in 2023, similar to kind of how Khalil Mack did things, 5 interceptions for Ward in 2023 and 23 pass breakups, finishing the year with a Pro Bowl nod. So Ward not far removed from a very impactful season. I think if you get him in here, play to his strengths in terms of that man coverage, I think he may be able to recreate a semblance of his 2023 form. And another player that is well-versed in man coverage, DJ Reed, formerly of the New York Jets, set to hit the open market overthecap.com projecting his market value at $6.3 million. A 7-year pro, also entering his age 29 season. Reed recorded an impressive 11 pass breakups this past season, and he's also known to be a strong man-to-man cornerback and a strong ability to win matchups on the outside, go up and contest with players that are known for their contested catchability. So Buffalo, I think, likely to lose Rasul Douglas in free agency. I think Ward and Reed could slot in as potential replacements as Buffalo looks to potentially transition to more man coverage in 2025. And lastly, another position of need this offseason, the wide receiver position. I know it's been reported that T. Higgins is likely to be hit with a franchise tag by the Cincinnati Bengals. That has yet to be officially announced, won't be announced until March 4. I had my date book here. I think March 4 is the franchise tag date, but correct me if I'm wrong. But I think the point of placing the franchise tag on Higgins for the Bengals is to work toward a long-term deal. Maybe if something goes awry in those conversations and Higgins isn't really willing to play under that franchise tag, maybe this is a player that the Bills could sneak in and trade for at a good price tag if he is to force his way out of Cincinnati. But like I said, likely to be hit with that franchise tag. He did miss a few games and this past season, has an extensive injury history, but if healthy, this is a player that he's not the fastest wide receiver, but his separation ability is something he can benefit from greatly and really can go up and make those contested catches that the Bills have been looking for with the drafting of Keon Coleman and bringing in a few other players over the years. And lastly, I mentioned Davante Adams. He is not a free agent at this time, but I think he's set to become a free agent with the transition that the Jets are going through and Aaron Rodgers departing New York. I think Davante Adams is about on his way out of there as well. I don't think he's willing to play for a team set to go through a rebuild such as the Jets are set to incur moving forward. So I think Davante Adams, and I think I saw somewhere on social media that a sportsbook has Adams or the Bills for that matter as the favorite to land Davante Adams if he does indeed become a free agent this offseason. And I think he'd be a perfect fit for the Bills. He is an aging player entering his age 33 season, but much like what you got from Amari Cooper last year, Adams is a player who demands attention, and he just makes everybody around him better. We'll take some of that attention away from Khalil Shakir, some of that attention away from Keon Coleman as he looks to continue his progression in this offensive system as well. And one more thought from Mexico Marty. Forget where I heard it, but supposedly Benford and Douglas are really tight. Yes, very tight, attached at the hip throughout the course of the season, working after practice. But at the same time, Rasul Douglas is a straight shooter. I think although he's very friendly with many players in that locker room, I think when it comes to the end of your career where Douglas is trending toward, I think you have to look to capitalize when you hit the free agent market. And like I said, he's a straight shooter. He hasn't really come out and said that he'd be willing to do whatever it takes to remain in Buffalo. So I think we're going to see Rasul Douglas part ways with the Bills in free agency this offseason. Before we get out of here, let's thank our sponsor once more, Forefathers Organics in Dansville.
Unlock the power of nature with Forefathers Organics, your premium CBD store. We offer the highest quality CBD and hemp products to liberate your mind, body, and soul, helping you live happy and free. Our mission is driven by excellence and transparency using cutting-edge scientific methods to combat stress and target issues at their source. From potent ingestible CBD to soothing topicals, all our products are USDA certified organic. Discover all natural wellness from farm to table. Visit forefathersorganics.com for more information.
All right, I don't want to get out of here without touching on James Cook's contract situation briefly. He's come out and been quite adamant about the fact that he will demand somewhere around $15 million this offseason. That would place him, I believe, as the highest paid running back in the NFL, or at least near the top of the running backs in terms of average annual salary. And there is no way in hell that the Bills are going to pay him $15 million. Perhaps this is some posturing from James Cook, just trying to get the most out of the Bills that he possibly can, knowing that this is a team that historically does not bring running backs back for a second contract. But if I'm the Bills, I have to strongly consider paying James Cook, like I said, not $15 million, but somewhere in the $8 to $12 million per season range. This is your second most effective offensive playmaker behind Josh Allen. I know you can throw Khalil Shakir into the mix, but he doesn't have the ability that James Cook has in terms of winning his one-on-one matchups out of the backfield, also contributing in the receiving game, which he took a step forward in this season, really putting those issues with the drops in the past. So I think the Bills are going to have to consider re-signing James Cook, not at the number that he's going to want, but this is a player that has obviously provided great value for this team in back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, led the league in rushing touchdowns this season as well. I like Ray Davis as much as the other guy. Ty Johnson is also fitting nicely in Buffalo, but they are not James Cook. They don't have his ability. Anything less than $12 million average annual value, I think, is automatic for Bills blitzkrieg. I don't know about automatic. I think anything under $10 million is automatic. I don't think that James Cook is going to agree to under $10 million per year. I think you're going to see him get over that. But this is a player, like I said, he fits in well to this offense, and he's a soft-spoken guy, somebody who really, until recently, you haven't heard much from. He's a good presence in the locker room. So I think this is a player that the Bills would like to get back. This is a player I would like to see the Bills bring back, but it's going to be not $15 million like he's looking for this offseason. It has been surprising to see him take to social media the way that he has, but hey, at the same time, the way that running backs are paid nowadays and undervalued the way that they are, although that tide is turning a bit with Saquon Barkley and others, I think you have to do whatever you can to put yourself out there and demand that type of money in hopes of setting yourself up, your family up in the future with the limited time that you have available to make money in this league. We know running backs' careers are short-lived more often than not. So I think we covered a lot in this episode. Thanks for Bruce. Thanks to Bruce for joining us. We'll be back throughout the week. Plenty of more guests to join us. Greg Thompson, Nate Geary, Carl Jones set to join us. I don't think I've left anybody out. Let me double check that. I've been asking around this week. Want to make sure I got everybody. Yeah, I think those four are where we're starting thus far, but we're really kicking things into high gear. I know it's the off season, but there's no off season here, right now on the podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next.